Hey, everybody. Welcome to our Wednesday Psalm Reflection. Cameron, Samron, how are you guys?
I like that. It's the first time I've ever been called Samron. I feel like I should be in Lord of the Rings or something with that name.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
Saruman, Samon.
Samron the Wise. Oh, I like that. That sounds really good.
You can give yourself a nickname,
Oh, you gave it to me. I just
but you added the wise. I was going to go with something very different than wise.
the Brown.
The doofus. All right. Hey, we've got a really cool psalm today. It's a favorite. Psalm 139,
The greatest hits.
one of the greatest hits. It's on the album for sure. Um,
If,
and
if
we've
there
got
was
two.
if there was a Psalms jukebox, if you know
Mhm.
what a jukebox is, there would be a button for this song.
There would. It would be on the top row for sure. Um, Cameron, you want to give it a read for us?
Yeah, we're gonna do verses 1 through 6 and 13 through 18.
Yes.
O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. You hem me in, behind and before. You have laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God! How vast is the sum of them! Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you.
Thank you, sir. So, Psalm 139 is a psalm of David, and it's written in a kind of reflective, worshipful kind of way where David, commentators think probably an older David later in his life, is reflecting on how things have gone for him, how life has been for him, and how God has been with him at very much every pass. And so he um, kind of recalls some of those things, and he does it in a way. This person I was, this commentary I was reading, this commentator was wondering um, how people might hear these words very differently, depending on their personality and depending on maybe the time of life that they're in. He's saying how David, as we might assume an old man, is really finding a lot of value in the intimacy and the closeness of God, whereas different people or people at different times of their life might really bristle at all of this intimacy because God is really, really close. There's this idea: you have searched me and you know me. There are some people who really invite that kind of searching and knowing, and there are some people who would say, I need a little space. There's a lot of physical closeness in this psalm. So there's you hedge me in, behind and before. In the Hebraic text, a hedge was like a protection, like you keep people out who should not come in. So um, God hedges people out. But I think when we talk about being hedged in our vernacular, it's more like we feel stuck where we're at. And then there's this idea of God having His hand upon you in a physical way. And if you're craving closeness, if you're craving intimacy, if you're craving touch, that can be a really nice thing. But also, there are some of us who just need our physical space. And so, this is a psalm that is really intimate, really vulnerable. It's emotionally close and it's physically close, and it can cause us to kind of react in a variety of different ways. So we're looking at this morning with our three um, questions that we bring to this venue each time, which is what sticks out to us, what do we learn about God, and how does this psalm help us pray? What do you guys think?
Cameron, you want to say something or should I jump in?
You can go first, Sam.
Okay. Hopefully I won't steal any of your thunder. Well, this is the second time we've looked at this psalm. It came up almost a year ago, I think, or maybe even in the summer. But one of the things we talked about, it's one of the greatest hits, which I made mention of. If there was a jukebox, there would be a button for this one. So probably Psalm 23, maybe Psalm 139. For folks who are unfamiliar with the scriptures, they might have heard of Psalm 139, maybe along with Psalm 23. So it's one of the greatest hits, and you can see why. I mean, the psalm is thousands of years old, and yet it feels so contemporary. It's like someone could have wrote this yesterday. I mean, it's so personal, and you got to think about, like, it's almost like a breakthrough of I don't know, consciousness, or a breakthrough of, like, um you know intimacy, or some sort of like connection with the divine, or it just uh it feels special in a way,
Mhm.
especially when you think about it in context thousands of years ago. Last time we talked about, and Stefan, you made a good point of this morning, is like there is an intimacy here where it's like in the first 6 verses, the psalmist is basically saying, you know everything about me. Like, I can't hide anything from you. Um, and the question is that good news or bad news? Like, are you comforted by that, or are you terrorized by that? And some of it depends on like where you are in your life, like you just said. Like, are you being naughty? Are you being bad? Are you running away from God? Then maybe this is like a little too close for comfort. But like, I just talked to someone this morning who's in the hospital. They just had surgery from Alger, and these words would be a great comfort to someone who's struggling, who's not feeling good. Just to know that God sees them wherever they are, and especially when they feel alone in a big hospital during COVID, that God's there with them. And so this could be a very comforting psalm, depending on your life circumstances.
Yeah, I love the image of behind and before. That's sort of following the hedging in or the hemming in, um, which then is picked up again in verse 13. That sort of this all-knowing God that's outside of, I guess, time and space, as it were, sort of knows us before we're born, when we're born, through our entire life, when we're going to die, sort of knows. It's just I just love the way that that sort of time is worked into this psalm. And so, yeah, you guys kind of stole my thunder. I will say though that the bit about were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I'm still with you. Um, the preciousness of God's thoughts, to basically sort of again, there's like no amount of numbering. There's no numbering system. There's no system of time that can sort of hem God in. So it's like God's hemming us in the sense, but we can't hem him in into our sort of finite brains. There's also an amazing, if you guys want to look it up, Bob Dylan song called "Every Grain of Sand,"
Yes.
which sort of illuminates these passages really well. One of the verses is, I gaze into the doorway of temptation's angry flame, and every time I pass that way, I always hear my name. Then onward in my journey, I come to understand that every hair is numbered like every grain of sand.
Mm.
Um, it's just, yeah, and then you basically have, like, right out of these verses that we read, which maybe we talked about the last time, you're jumping right into sort of slaying the wicked and bloodthirsty men and all of this violence. And I often find there's so many passages in scripture where you have this sort of like deep intimacy, this sort of like, I don't know, womb-like heart with God, and then it's just like everything blows up into violence. And so it's like it just sort of shows you how like keeping that core center super grounded and intimate with Christ is like sort of the most important things for us not to just basically revert to our sinful natures that just want to like be angry and violent.
Yeah.
So it's just a good reminder of that too, especially coming off of, again, more violence in the news cycle. And just like, where does that come from? It sort of comes from an individual's loss of touch with the divine nature within themselves, um, however you may phrase that.
Mm. I love how the first 6 verses, there's a theme of like, you know me, you discern me, you perceive, you're familiar. So you get this real sense. I mean, the psalmist is like, when I wake up, when I go to bed, um, you see me, you know me, you see all my thoughts. But then the psalmist in the second half of 13 through 18 goes even further. It kind of expands, says, you saw me when I was in the womb, when I was being put together. And in fact, not only just watching, but involved in the process. So the psalmist says, you were like weaving me together, which is just like, holy smokes, like, okay, like like God not only sees our everydays, but he like hems us in before and after. He's like the alpha and the omega, like our total existence from the womb to our death is encapsulated by this God who
Mm-hmm.
knows us and sees us. That's why I put those words up there today. God knows and God sees. That's the theme, I think, of one Psalm 139, is that he sees us, not just as watching us, but he sees us, perceives us, but then he also knows us in a way that no one else does. And I think that should bring us a lot of comfort. That last question, how does this help us to pray? I mean, you can really spill your heart out to God. You can share your most intimate thoughts and feelings, and you can risk being angry with God and even cussing at God. And I mean, you can be your most ugly, messy, hurtful self in front of God. And it doesn't surprise him. He knows our hearts, he knows our minds. And this God is determined to love us and to save us. And so there's a real like invitation here to really get honest and raw and vulnerable with God.
Mm-hmm. I like, yeah, that's a great point, Sam. In verse 15 and 16, there's this discussion of um, being in the secret place and being woven together in the depths of the earth and that unformed body. That the way that that's described is, it reminds me of the creation account in Genesis 1, where there's just chaos and everything is unformed, and there's no order to anything. But then God brings the order to that, and God knows those things, and that's where creation comes from. And then it's almost like a bookend to that. The last verse that we read, where when I awake, I am still with you. And so there's this, God was there before we were anything that was put together. And then verse 18, when I wake, so when I, for the very beginning of my day, where I remember again that I'm a human person and I become conscious, and I'm waking up, God was already there. And so from the very first moment before we had any consciousness to the moment we remembered this morning again that we have a consciousness, God is like, I'm caught up with that. And so there's this sense that um, at every step along the path, God is up to date on my story. So if the question is, how does this make me, how does this help me pray? Um, we can pray in the moment, knowing that God knows that He's totally up to date, and even before we realize what's going on, He is abreast to what's happening in our lives.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the prayer too is it's a little bit of a cliche in the Christian circles, but I still love it so much as the idea of the difference between knowing God and being known by God, and that this sort of psalm continues to bring you into the importance of being known by God. And so one prayer that I've been doing recently that I think is sort of at the heart of this psalm is is literally, Lord, discover yourself in me. You know, that sort of intimate relationship. Discover yourself in me, and then essentially, you know, if it's your will, reveal that to me. You know, tell me what you see. um, and it's sort of just that wonderful interplay of being in the yeah, it's like the hen and her chicks, you know, sort of imagery. um
Cool.
One lectionary connection, because this passage is always paired with other lectionary passages. In Old Testament, this is the Psalm, a New Testament gospel passage, and an epistle. And the Old Testament passage that gets paired with this is the story of Hannah when she is barren and she can't give birth to a son, and she's heartbroken over it. And then the Lord makes a promise to her that she's going to bear a son, and she gives birth to Samuel, the prophet. So it's interesting to read this psalm as if it was the prayer of Hannah. Not only her reflecting on, you saw me, so Hannah speaking, you saw when I was formed, but then as she has a life being formed in her, which is Samuel, that God also sees that life. So that's very interesting. And then, Stephan, you're going to preach on the gospel passage, which is when Jesus first calls his disciples. He sees is it Thomas? Philip. He
Nathaniel.
sees Nathaniel under the fig tree. And he says to Nathaniel, I saw you under the fig tree. And it's the same idea that God sees us, whether it's in the womb or we're walking on the sidewalk or we're under a fig tree. Like Jesus says, I saw you. And that's enough for Nathaniel to say, my Lord, my God. In other words, like, I'm going to follow you. And Jesus is surprised. He's like, that's all it took? Jesus, like, I simply said, I saw you under the fig tree. And that was enough for Nathaniel to say, I'm going to put my faith in you. So it was always interesting how the passages get paired together. And I'm hoping that whoever listens to this lectionary psalm reflection on our Wednesdays, on Sunday, when you hear the sermon and the passage, I hope that you're kind of drawing connections between the psalm and whatever is being preached on.
But to be seen for the first time, I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we can probably say that, you know, in terms of when the light goes on in our head, that we, you know, in our spouse, you know, to be seen, like that's super profound, you know. And how many people we know that don't feel like they've ever really been seen.
Yeah.
And that's like, I mean, that's like a huge, I mean, that's like the Christian, that's like disciples, or that's the Christian life right there, is to see people too. You know, we're called to do that.
You could spend a month simply meditating on what Jesus says to Nathaniel. I saw you, and plunge the depths of that. Jesus sees us. Like, he not only knows where he like sees us. So, Cameron, put this into a nice little song.
What do you got?
It's a song called "You Are Before Me, Lord," and it's just a sort of pretty piano ballad. Great. That's in the "Lift Up Your Hearts" hymnal.
Awesome.
And I took out one of the verses because that's another theological conversation. So if you really are dying to look up which verse I took out and dwell in it, you're welcome to. It's number 336, and lift up your hearts. Feel free to drop me an email and we can discuss it, because I was like, what is it trying to say here? But yeah, I think you just have to hear it.
Sounds great.
I'm excited. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Next
New
week.
year.
Can we do it again next week?
We'll be here.
I'll be here.
Let's make it happen.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You are before me, Lord, you are behind, and over me you have spread out your hand. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me to at a grasp too great to understand. If I should take my flight into the dawn, if I should dwell on ocean's farthest shore, your mighty hand will rest upon me still, and your right hand will guard me evermore. If I should say, let darkness cover me, and I shall hide within the veil of night, surely the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as the day, the darkest night. Search me, O God, search me and know my heart. Try me, O God, my mind and spirit try. Keep me from any path that gives